Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for the Mindful Eye and the Daily Critique. Today's image was created by Alan, who is an intermediate photographer from Australia. This is another question-based critique. Alan shot this with a full-frame sensor camera, effective focal length of 32 millimeters, ISO 100 f11 in 4 seconds. This is the exposure trio. Paraphrasing Alan's backstory, the location is Cradle Mountain National Park, Tasmania, Australia. In the most basic sense, Alan says that his main subject here is this national icon. Cradle in the mountains in the background of the shot, but he said he wanted to shoot it from a different vantage point. So don't know this location, don't know the way it's typically photographed, but I totally applaud Alan for going to a place that obviously in Australia is heavily photographed and finding his own unique way of seeing this. One of the things that Alan mentions in his backstory is slowing the shutter down intentionally to get this really nice circle of movement and movement over here in the pool of water in the foreground. He also mentions cropping away part of the foreground rocks that were close, because he says from a depth of field standpoint, he just didn't have the kind of sharpness down there that he wanted, and that leads to his questions. First question is very general, just what do I think about the composition. Second question connects to depth of field, very specific. He says, without resorting to focus stacking, how can I get sharpness from near to far? And so first let me say what focus stacking is. That would be where from the tripod we focus to different places from near to far in the scene, planning on after the fact using a piece of software like Helicon Focus. Take a series of images, focus to different places, then the software runs an algorithm and finds the sharpest place of each frame and then blends all of them to essentially give you, hopefully at the end, unlimited depth of field. The answer to Alan's question without resorting to that is I don't know how you would do it. Alan's shooting 32 millimeters here. I can't exactly answer this question from a technical standpoint because I don't know the actual physical scenario. I don't know how close the rocks that were cropped out are. It's 32 millimeters. He's done something smart here. He's not stopped down any further than f11, and that is one of the big challenges when it comes to depth of field with digital capture. When I shot 35 millimeter film, I would stop down to some of the smaller apertures, but I don't do that with my digital cameras because digital out-resolves film, which means, unfortunately, that it exaggerates optical aberrations. So if we can only stop down to f11 here before we start to lose overall sharpness, then there may not be a hyperfocal focusing point in this scene at this focal length where it's possible in one frame to get the kind of sharpness that Alan wants. But that's another thing. I don't know exactly what kind of sharpness he wants. Depth of field is an unbelievably complicated topic. Your depth of field calculators and scales in a lot of respects are pretty worthless. They might be some kind of terrible general starting point. They're based on getting acceptable sharpness in an 8x10 inch print. Who even knows what that means? You definitely can know that's a pretty low standard if you want to print bigger than 8x10, and you would like critical, not acceptable sharpness. One thing that Alan can do here to try to give some practical information, one thing he could do to learn more about his own process, because really depth of field is very personal to your camera, your lens, and the way you want to express sharpness, how big you print, the kind of paper you use, how close people are going to be to your prints, all that stuff. One thing that he could have done here, if he didn't do it, is instead of focusing to different places, thinking of focus stacking, to focus to slightly different places to see at f11 what would have in his reality been the actual best hyperfocal focusing point. And that's a test that you could do so you could start to nail this down for yourself. The truth is, I would focus stack unless I had a tilt shift lens. And in this scene, the plane of focus is pretty simple, so tilt shift lens would work pretty well to give you outrageous depth of field at an aperture like f5.6 or f8 or f11. Probably spent more time on that than I should have. Hopefully that was helpful to somebody somewhere. Let's talk about the composition. I really like it a lot. I think it's a beautifully framed shot. There's a really nice sense here of it's just simple balance. Shadow here, shadow subject here, and then if we look at kind of the general negative space structure up here and the way Alan has composed these rocks into the foreground, there's a real nice sense of top to bottom, left to right balance that's sort of framing the main subject here, the cradle in the mountains. And there's also a really beautiful sense of this shape pushing out towards the main idea. There's also a stunning quality of light here. So how do I like the composition? I love it. Here's what I would change about this image. I personally would change the processing on it. And one of the big potential takeaways besides hopefully anything that you got out of the depth of field discussion. I feel bad about that. There's just not enough time here to really answer that question in any kind of proper way. One of the things I hope you can really get out of the video is just the power of showing the viewer a lot less, particularly in a big scene like this where there are a lot of places the viewer can go. One of the big problems with digital capture, particularly if you do not have a reference point for film and the way film used to see, is that digital will give you incredibly open shadows. And so a lot of times we're unfortunately with the digital camera pushing towards this kind of average histogram, but in a big landscape like this, particularly where you have dramatic lighting, and you can see a lot of areas in this shot are in the shade, then I would like to have a lot more low end here. If I restrict the viewer by not giving the viewer as much information, it'll be a lot easier to take the viewer on a meaningful journey. And this is a shot that expresses an enormous amount of detail in a lot of space. I am going to come back and show you in another video specifically how I did the work that I'm about to do. But let me just show you the layers. First, I would do something, I don't do that much to images, but I did it to this image. I just overall darkened it. And you can see that I took the pixels on the histogram and I've pushed them pretty darn far to the left. If we just go back and forth here and you watch the histogram, and now if you go back and forth and you look at the image, all of a sudden this very beautiful spotlight effect and this chiaroscuro effect that's happening in this landscape shot starts to really help to corral the viewer's eye in a much more specific way. And then another thing that I'll do in black and white, and it's one of the beauties of black and white is abstract, so it gives me a lot more leeway to play around with local contrast. The viewer doesn't quite know where the sun is. You generally know where it is. You see all these clouds. And so I can have all kinds of fun in terms of where I want to place value or make it look like the light is hitting in this shot. I mean, I can't totally change the direction of the light, or that will throw up a red flag, but I can have a lot of fun with local contrast. And one of the things that I'll do in a black and white shot is look at the implied structure, this shape. There's a really beautiful implication of a diamond shape here. Here it is, and moving in the other direction. These things, if they're accentuated, can add to the structure of the image and also add to the rhythm of the image, because our main ideas are spear shape, mountains. So I've come in here and really played around with where I have placed the local contrast in the shot. After darkening, I am just redirecting the viewer's eye by having a lot of fun with the abstraction of black and white and local tonality and contrast. One other thing I wanted to mention here is another thing that I look at is not just the perspective distortion of overlay, where two things physically are touching or overlaying each other. That can almost always happen in photography, just one of the ways the camera always lies relative to the way we perceive reality. The other thing I'm looking for is implied overlays, and there's one right here. You have this center of energy sitting right underneath this mountain, and I would have loved to move the camera a little bit where maybe this actually comes over a little bit so that it's not quite on tangent with this peak or this cloud. It actually sits in this saddle and it rhymes that, and I feel like that would create a little bit more of, at the same time, at one time, dynamic implied movement and balance. And so here's just doing a real rough selection at the bottom of the image and rescaling it so I can move that rock from being on tangent with the big peak to being more in the saddle. And I just want to do that one more time before and after to see how that makes you feel as the viewer about how the image is balanced. And I came in at the end and had even more fun with local contrast. Love where Alan started here. Very, very powerful composition in terms of beautiful balance, and then combining that with dynamic movement. Fantastic quality of light, and again, I totally applaud Alan for going somewhere that is very iconic and then carving his own vision, his own path, going his own way. Very powerful concept. As an artist and a creative person, I want to say a big thank you to Alan. Thanks to you for being here. Hope to see you again real soon on the Mindful Eye.